Most people fear sadness because they think it will stay forever. But no emotion in your entire life has ever stayed permanently, not one. Today, you'll learn how to face sadness the way a Buddhist monk does, without fear, without resistance, and without letting it define you. 1. Sadness is not you. Most people make one simple but destructive mistake. They treat every emotion as their identity. The moment sadness appears, the mind immediately translates it into, "I am sad." That phrase feels harmless, but it's the beginning of suffering. When you say, "I am sad," you're merging your entire identity with a temporary emotion. You're letting a passing cloud convince you it is the sky. Buddhism teaches a different approach. Don't become the emotion, observe it. Instead of, "I am sad," shift to, "Sadness is here." It sounds subtle, but the difference is massive. The first statement traps you inside the emotion. The second lifts you above it. Think of sadness like a visitor knocking on your door. You can let it enter, sit with it, feel it, but you don't hand over the keys to your entire house. You don't let it tell you who you are. When sadness arises, simply notice it. The heaviness in the chest, the drop in energy, the shift in mood. When you observe it without merging with it, you create space between you and the feeling. That space is everything. In that space, you remember, you're bigger than any emotion passing through your mind. You've felt sadness before. It came and went. It has never stayed permanently. If it didn't define you then, it doesn't define you now. Understanding this breaks the illusion that your emotions are your identity. You are the awareness behind them, the space they move through. Emotions are temporary events, not permanent truths. The moment you realize sadness is something you experience, not something you are, it immediately loses strength. It becomes lighter, softer, easier to face. And the best part? You don't have to force the sadness to disappear. The moment you stop identifying with it, it begins to dissolve on its own. 2. Let the wave rise and fall. Sadness is not a solid object. It's not a permanent state. It's a movement, a wave, and like every wave, it has a natural rhythm. It rises, it peaks, and eventually it falls. But most people never experience this natural rhythm because they interrupt it. The moment sadness begins to rise, they panic, they judge it, they tense up, they start fighting it or trying to escape it. And the more you resist an emotion, the more tightly it clings to you. In Buddhism, the mind is taught to understand the true nature of emotions. They are temporary, fluid, and always changing. They only become stuck when you interfere with their movement. When sadness hits and you resist it, when you say, "I shouldn't feel this," or "Why is this happening again?" you freeze the wave. You lock it inside your body. You trap it long after it was supposed to pass. Think of the ocean. If you relax and let a wave lift you, it carries you and then sets you down. If you fight it, if you stiffen up, the same wave knocks the wind out of you. Sadness works the exact same way. The moment you let it rise without resistance, it loses its power to overwhelm you. Letting the wave rise and fall doesn't mean liking the feeling. It doesn't mean you want sadness. It simply means you stop fighting what is already here. You allow the emotion to complete its natural cycle. You observe it instead of wrestling with it. This looks like noticing the heaviness as it grows, feeling it peak, and recognizing the slow, natural dissolving that follows. When you let sadness follow its rhythm, you realize something important. Emotions don't need your intervention. They need your permission to move. The truth is, no emotion lasts forever unless you hold it in place. The wave wants to fall. The sadness wants to pass. Your only job is to stop interrupting it. When you learn this, sadness stops feeling like a force that can crush you. It becomes something that moves through you instead of something that settles inside you. You stop feeling trapped by emotions because you finally understand how they behave. And once you experience this, even once the full rise and fall of an emotion without resistance, you'll never look at sadness the same way again. The fear around it disappears. The panic disappears. You realize, I can handle this. I don't need to fight this. This will pass, because it always does. Every single time. 3. Investigate the feeling, not the story. Sadness itself is rarely the real problem. The actual suffering comes from the story your mind builds around the sadness. The human mind is a storyteller by nature. It cannot simply leave a feeling alone. The moment an uncomfortable emotion appears, the mind starts constructing explanations, assumptions, predictions, and judgments. Suddenly, you're not just feeling a moment of sadness, you're drowning in an entire narrative crafted by your own thoughts. Buddhism teaches that suffering multiplies when you mistake these mental stories for reality. A simple emotion like sadness might be light and manageable on its own, a temporary heaviness, a passing discomfort, but the mind immediately attaches meaning to it. Something is wrong with me. This always happens. Nobody understands me. This means I'll never be happy. I'm failing. I'm broken. This is who I am. Notice something. None of these thoughts describe the actual emotion. They are interpretations layered on top of it. Sadness is a sensation. The story is a prison. If you remove the story, what remains is just energy moving in the body, heaviness in the chest, pressure behind the eyes, a sinking feeling in the stomach. These sensations are uncomfortable, yes, but they're not unbearable. Most importantly, they are temporary. The story is what makes the sadness feel endless. The story is what convinces you that the emotion is personal, permanent, and meaningful. When you believe the story, sadness becomes suffering. When you drop the story, sadness becomes just another moment. Buddhism teaches a simple practice. When sadness appears, turn inward and examine the raw sensation instead of narrating it. Ask yourself, what does this emotion feel like in the body without the story? Maybe it's a tightness in the throat. Maybe it's a heaviness across the shoulders. Maybe it's warmth behind the eyes. As soon as you observe these sensations directly, something remarkable happens. They lose intensity. Why? Because you're seeing sadness for what it truly is, not what your mind exaggerates it into. This is not about analyzing your emotions. It's not about explaining them or fixing them. It's about shifting your attention from the narrative to the sensation. When you do this, the emotional charge drops. You're no longer fueling the emotion with mental noise. You're meeting sadness directly, without distortion. Think of it this way. The mind story is like gasoline. The sadness is the spark. If you keep pouring thoughts onto it, the fire grows. If you stop feeding it, the flame burns out on its own. When you meet the raw sensation, you learn something powerful. The body can handle an emotion. It's the mind story that overwhelms you. Once you see this clearly, sadness no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes something you can face without fear, because you've separated the temporary feeling from the lifelong story your mind tries to attach to it. And the moment you stop believing the story, the sadness begins to fade. It no longer has a narrative to hold it in place. It loses weight. It loses authority. It loses its ability to define you. You're finally seeing sadness through direct experience, not through the lens of your fears. This is where real freedom begins. 4. Breathe into the pain. Don't brace against it. When sadness hits, your first instinct is almost always physical. Before you think a single thought, before you form a single story, the body reacts. Your chest tightens, your throat closes, your breathing becomes shallow, your shoulders contract, your entire posture shifts into a subtle self-defense mode. This is not weakness, it's biology. The body tries to protect you from emotional pain the same way it protects you from physical danger. The problem is that this automatic reaction traps the emotion inside you. Buddhism teaches that what you resist becomes lodged in your body. The more you brace, the more the sadness solidifies. You experience the emotion like a knot that won't loosen because you're physically holding it in place with tension. Most people think their suffering is coming from the sadness itself, but very often the real suffering comes from the tightness surrounding the sadness. You're not suffocating because of the emotion, you're suffocating because you're holding your breath. You're not overwhelmed because the sadness is too much. You're overwhelmed because you're resisting it with your entire body. The Buddhist response is the opposite of what your instincts tell you. Instead of closing, you open. Instead of tightening, you soften. Instead of shrinking, you expand. And the most direct way to do this is through the breath. Breathing into the pain is not a poetic metaphor, it's a literal instruction. When sadness sits in your chest, take a slow breath directly into that area. When it sits in your stomach, breathe into that space. When your throat feels like it's collapsing, breathe right into that sensation. You're not trying to push the sadness away. You're not trying to fix it. You're simply giving it room. This space is what allows the emotion to move. Emotions are like trapped animals. When you corner them, they become frantic. When you give them space, they calm down. The breath creates that space. It stretches the room around the sadness so the emotion can unfold naturally instead of suffocating inside tension. The breath does something else too. It shifts your state from survival mode to awareness mode. When your breathing deepens, your nervous system switches from danger to safe. And when the body feels safe, emotions begin to flow instead of getting stuck. Think of how the ocean behaves. When the tide hits resistance, rocks, walls, barriers, it crashes and becomes violent. But when the shore is open and soft, the water rolls in gently, spreads out, and then recedes. Your body is the shore. Sadness is the tide. If you tighten, the wave hits hard. If you open, the wave softens and retreats. Breathing into the pain doesn't eliminate the sadness instantly. That's not the point. The point is to stop imprisoning the emotion with unconscious resistance. When you breathe into the exact place where the sadness sits, you're communicating to your body. It's safe. You can release now. The breath becomes an invitation for the emotion to pass through instead of getting stuck. Most people try to think their sadness away. In Buddhism, the body comes first. The mind calms down after the body releases tension, not before. A calm mind grows out of a relaxed body. When you learn to soften into sadness instead of bracing against it, something profound happens. The emotion loses its sharp edges. It becomes less aggressive. It becomes manageable. You stop feeling like sadness is attacking you and start realizing it's simply moving through you. You're not drowning. You're allowing. You're not collapsing. You're expanding. You're not resisting. You're breathing. This is one of the deepest and most transformative skills in Buddhist practice. Learning to meet pain with spaciousness instead of fear. And once you experience the power of this even once, you start to understand something. Essential suffering doesn't come from the emotion itself, but from the rigid armor you've built around it. When you drop that armor, the sadness finally has permission to leave. 5. Ask the sadness what it's trying to teach you. Most people treat sadness as an intruder, something that barges into their lives uninvited, something to push away, suppress, or hide from. But in Buddhism, sadness is not an enemy. It's a messenger, and like every messenger, it arrives because it carries something you need to see, something you've ignored, something you've refused to confront, something you've held onto too tightly, something you've pretended doesn't hurt you, something that's quietly shaping your life from beneath the surface. You don't suffer because sadness exists. You suffer because you refuse to listen to it. This lesson requires a level of honesty most people avoid. But once you master it, sadness stops feeling like a punishment and starts revealing itself as a guide. Sadness shows up for a reason, every single time. Not to harm you, but to show you something. When you meet sadness with curiosity instead of fear, the entire relationship shifts. The emotion transforms from something overwhelming into something meaningful. You're no longer being attacked, you're being shown. But to understand the lesson, you need to drop your defenses. You need to stop assuming sadness is here because life is unfair or because you're failing. If you approach sadness with judgment, you won't learn anything. You'll just keep repeating the same emotional cycles over and over. The Buddhist approach is simple but powerful. When sadness rises, sit with it and ask, "What are you trying to show me?" Not with impatience, not with desperation, not with a demand for quick relief, but with openness. Sadness doesn't speak in words. It speaks in sensations, realizations, memories, and subtle truths that rise when you stop resisting. You ask the question by becoming quiet, still, and observant, not by expecting a verbal answer. You create space inside the emotion. You breathe into it, and you wait. A truth always emerges. Sometimes sadness is showing you that you're attached to something that's slipping away. A relationship, an expectation, a version of yourself, a future you imagined. Attachment always produces sadness when reality doesn't cooperate. This isn't punishment, it's clarity. It's the universe showing you the exact point where you're clinging. Sometimes sadness comes because you've been avoiding something, a conversation, a decision, a boundary you need to set, a truth you don't want to admit. Sadness becomes pressure, building quietly until you finally turn and face what you've been running from. Sometimes sadness reveals exhaustion, emotional, mental, or spiritual, not because you're weak, but because you've been carrying responsibilities, roles, or burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. Sadness becomes the body's way of saying, "You need rest, not strength." Sometimes sadness is grief, not just for a person, but for a dream that didn't unfold, a chapter that closed too early, or a version of yourself you've outgrown. Grief is not a sign of failure, it is a sign that you are human. Sometimes sadness comes from self-neglect. When you've abandoned your own needs for too long, sadness steps in to remind you that you matter too, even if you've forgotten. And sometimes sadness comes simply because the heart needs to soften. When you've been hard, numb, guarded, or disconnected, sadness melts the frozen parts. It reopens what you shut down. It reconnects you with your own depth. Sadness, in its purest form, is intelligence. It's awareness. It's your inner life trying to communicate with you. But you can only hear these teachings if you stop rushing to escape the emotion. If every time sadness appears you drown it in distractions, noise, busyness, or denial, you miss the message it brought with it. You silence the guide. You kill the messenger. And the lesson you refuse to learn repeats itself until you finally sit still and listen. When you begin asking sadness what it wants to show you, something profound happens. The emotion softens. It loses its sharpness. It stops feeling aggressive. It stops feeling like an attack. Because you're no longer fighting it, you're inviting it. The moment the mind opens, the sadness no longer needs to push so hard to get your attention. Imagine sadness as a traveler knocking on your door. When you pretend nobody is home, it knocks louder. When you barricade the door, it pushes harder. When you shout at it to leave, it waits. But if you open the door, let it speak, and allow it to deliver its message, it doesn't need to linger. It leaves the moment its purpose is complete. And its purpose is always clarity. Clarity about what you value. Clarity about what hurts you. Clarity about what needs to heal. Clarity about where you're lying to yourself. Clarity about what it's time to release. Clarity about who you've become. Clarity about who you no longer are. Sadness is often the first sign you've outgrown something, a behavior, a relationship, a mindset, an environment. Growth rarely begins with joy. It usually begins with discomfort, confusion, or loss. Sadness becomes the signal that something deep within you is shifting. But you won't understand this if you rush to numb it. Most people fear sadness because they assume it will swallow them whole. But the truth is, sadness isn't trying to drown you, it's trying to cleanse you. It's trying to show you what's no longer aligned with your life. It's trying to release what you're holding too tightly. Listening to sadness doesn't mean overthinking. It doesn't mean analyzing endlessly. It means observing gently and openly. It means letting the truth rise by itself. Sometimes the insight comes after minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes days, but it always comes. And when it does, the sadness changes. It becomes lighter. It becomes clearer. It becomes almost gentle. Because once the message is delivered, the emotion no longer needs to stay in its heavy form. This is why in Buddhism, sadness is not something to be feared. It's something to be understood. It points to your attachments, your wounds, your unmet needs, your ignored desires, your unhealed past, your current misalignment, and your deepest values. It reveals everything you try to hide, not to shame you, but to free you. The sadness isn't hurting you. Your resistance to its lesson is what hurts you. When you learn to meet sadness with curiosity, you stop feeling powerless. You stop feeling like emotions happen to you and start realizing they're happening for you. They're guiding you. They're aligning you with truth. And here's the most transformative part. Once you start listening to your sadness, it becomes easier to listen to every other emotion. Fear, anger, disappointment, loneliness, all of them carry messages. All of them point to truth. All of them show you where growth is waiting. When you stop treating sadness as a threat and start treating it as a teacher, you grow into someone sadness can no longer control. Someone who sees emotions clearly, someone who doesn't run, doesn't hide, doesn't collapse. Someone who moves through life with awareness, courage, and understanding. And eventually, you realize that sadness never came to break you. It came to wake you. It came to reveal what your mind was ignoring. It came to show you what your heart already knew. Every sadness has a lesson. Every lesson has purpose. And once the purpose is understood, sadness has no reason to stay. 6. Let go of the idea that life must always feel good. One of the deepest sources of human suffering is not sadness itself. It's the belief that sadness shouldn't exist. The belief that life should always feel smooth, pleasant, stable, predictable, and emotionally comfortable. This expectation is invisible to most people, yet it quietly shapes almost every emotional reaction they have. Most people move through life with a silent assumption. I should feel good most of the time. If I'm sad, something is wrong. If I'm stressed, life is unfair. If I'm hurt, it means I'm failing. This belief makes every difficult emotion feel like an insult, a threat, or a personal attack. The emotion is already heavy. The expectation makes it unbearable. In Buddhism, this expectation is seen as one of the core illusions that fuel suffering. Life was never designed to be a continuous stream of pleasant feelings. Life is not built on comfort, it's built on change. It is built on cycles. It is built on flux. It is built on impermanence. Yet the mind clings to comfort as if it were a birthright. The painful irony is this. The more you demand that life feel good, the worse you feel. Because every time reality brings discomfort, which it inevitably will, you treat it as a mistake instead of a natural part of existence. You treat sadness as a malfunction instead of a message. You treat difficulty as an injustice instead of a season. You treat pain as a punishment instead of a teacher. When you believe life should feel good, you take emotional pain personally. You think it's a sign of weakness, failure, or misfortune. You think it reflects something defective inside you. You think it means you're broken. You attach shame to sadness, guilt to struggle, fear to uncertainty. Your suffering multiplies because you're fighting reality with an unrealistic expectation. Buddhism teaches a radically different approach. Drop the demand. Drop the entitlement. Drop the belief that life owes you comfort. Not because you don't deserve happiness, but because this belief blinds you to the nature of reality. Life contains pleasure and pain, gain and loss, joy and sorrow, expansion and contraction, connection and separation. To demand one side and reject the other is to wage war against the nature of existence. You lose that war every time. When you let go of the belief that life must feel good, sadness stops being a personal insult. It stops being an emotional emergency. It stops being something you need to escape. It becomes something normal, a natural, temporary state that every human experiences. Sadness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that you're alive. When you accept this, the emotional pressure softens. You stop panicking when a difficult emotion rises. You stop assuming something terrible is happening just because you feel uncomfortable inside. You stop amplifying sadness by treating it like a failure. Most people never realize how much they suffer simply because they expect constant comfort. They expect their minds to always be calm, their relationships to always feel good, their circumstances to always cooperate, their emotions to always be stable. These expectations are not only unrealistic, they're unnatural. Even the happiest moments contain vulnerability. Even joy carries impermanence. Even peace requires acceptance of change. When you stop expecting constant emotional pleasure, you begin to see sadness more clearly. You notice that sadness isn't an enemy, it's just weather, a passing condition of the human experience. You don't panic when it arrives because you no longer expect the sky to stay sunny forever. You understand that clouds are part of the sky too. When sadness arrives, instead of thinking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to think, "This is part of being human." When discomfort hits, you stop layering judgment on top of it. The emotion remains, but the additional suffering disappears. This is the key difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the raw emotion. Suffering is the resistance, the story, the expectation, the demand. Life will naturally give you pain. The mind creates the suffering. By letting go of the belief that life must always feel good, you remove the layer of suffering that intensifies your sadness. You stop adding mental punishment to emotional pain. You allow the sadness to exist without making it mean something dramatic. This doesn't make life emotionless. It makes life honest. It removes illusion. It frees you to feel emotions without collapsing under them. You stop taking sadness as a sign of failure. You stop assuming that anything other than constant positivity means something is wrong with you. You start embracing a simple truth. Life include discomfort, and you can handle it. This realization strengthens you in ways comfort never could. It gives you resilience, adaptability, emotional intelligence, and inner stability. When you no longer demand comfort, you become more peaceful, not because life stops changing, but because you stop fighting change. And here's the paradox. Once you let go of the idea that life must always feel good, life starts feeling much better. Not because the emotions disappear, but because the fear and resistance around them dissolve. You stop running, you stop hiding, you stop panicking, you become grounded, you become steady. Sadness no longer feels like a disaster. Discomfort no longer feels like doom. Pain no longer feels like punishment. You see everything as part of the path, part of the experience, part of the human journey. And through this acceptance, peace begins to grow, not as an emotion, but as a way of living. Not as temporary relief, but as deep understanding. Not as something fragile, but as something strong and unshakable. When you let go of the demand for constant comfort, nothing in life can break you. You stop being terrified of emotions. You stop being controlled by your feelings. You stop resisting reality. You start flowing with it, adapting to it, understanding it. This is one of the most liberating truths Buddhism offers. Life doesn't have to feel good for you to be at peace. Peace comes from acceptance, not from perfection. Strength comes from understanding, not from constant happiness. Freedom comes from dropping expectations, not from chasing pleasure. When you embrace this, sadness becomes just another moment, not an enemy, not a threat, not a failure, just a temporary shift in your inner weather. And someone who understands this cannot be emotionally destroyed. 7. Return to impermanence. Nothing stays. If you truly understood impermanence, sadness would lose almost all of its power over you. This isn't an exaggeration. In Buddhism, impermanence anicca is one of the foundational truths of existence. Everything rises, everything falls, everything appears, everything dissolves. Nothing, absolutely nothing, remains fixed. But the human mind resists this truth with everything it has. You don't suffer because sadness exists. You suffer because you believe sadness will stay forever. When sadness hits, the mind freezes time. It convinces you that this feeling is permanent. It whispers, "This is who you are now. This won't go away. This is your new normal. You'll always feel like this." Those thoughts are illusions, not reality. Nothing in your life, not a single emotion, not a single moment, not a single chapter, has ever stayed permanently. Yet when sadness rises, the mind acts as if this time is different, as if this emotion will be the first one in history to take root and never leave. Impermanence is not meant to be a comforting concept. It is meant to be a truth you see directly, not a belief you repeat to yourself. When you observe your emotions closely, you begin to understand something that most people miss. Sadness doesn't stay still. It moves. It pulses. It shifts. It fades. It returns. It dissolves. It changes texture, temperature, weight, and location inside your body. Even in your darkest moments, the emotion is never static. But if you're wrapped inside the story, or drowning in resistance, or frozen in fear, you don't see this movement. You think you're stuck. But you're never stuck. Only your perception is stuck. The emotion itself is always changing. Impermanence is happening whether you accept it or not. The only question is whether you suffer through it or understand it. Most people suffer because they cling to an impossible fantasy. They want pleasant emotions to last forever and unpleasant emotions to vanish instantly. They want control over something that is inherently uncontrollable. They want permanence in a world that is made entirely of change. This clinging is the birthplace of suffering. Listen carefully. It is not sadness that traps you. It is your refusal to let sadness move. You want to hold on to joy. You want to freeze happiness in time. You want to lock peace in place. And when sadness appears, you want to evict it immediately, without understanding why it came. You don't want to flow with life. You want life to obey your emotional preferences. Life doesn't work like that, and it never will. Impermanence frees you from this impossible demand. It teaches you that emotions are like guests. They come and they go. Some stay longer than you want. Some barely visit. Some arrive loudly, some silently. But none of them are permanent residents. When you deeply understand this, you stop fearing emotions. You stop panicking. You stop catastrophizing. You stop believing every internal shift is a crisis. You begin to observe your inner world with calm detachment. Sadness is here now. It will leave later. Hurt is rising. It will fade. This moment feels heavy. It won't stay. This isn't toxic positivity. It's not denial. It's the truth of existence. Look at your own life. Look at every emotion you've ever felt. Every heartbreak. Every disappointment. Every loss. Every fear. Every moment of brokenness. Where are those emotions now? They came. They passed. They made space for different seasons. Even your happiest moments, the ones you wished would last forever, didn't stay. They rose, peaked, and faded. Impermanence isn't selective. It applies to everything. This is not a tragedy. It's the mechanism that allows life to evolve. If nothing ever changed, no healing would be possible. If nothing ever changed, growth would be impossible. If nothing ever changed, you would be stuck in your past forever. Impermanence is the greatest mercy of the universe. Sadness will fade. Hurt will fade. Confusion will fade. Fear will fade. This moment will fade. This is guaranteed. Once you see impermanence clearly, you stop being terrified of negative emotions because you know they can't imprison you. You stop desperately clinging to positive emotions because you know that clinging is the very thing that creates suffering. You begin to live in alignment with reality instead of fighting against it. Impermanence also teaches another subtle truth. Every emotion you feel is passing through you, not coming from you. Just like weather moves across the sky, emotions move across your awareness. The sky is not harmed by storms. The storms do not define the sky. In the same way, emotions do not define the awareness experiencing them. You are the sky. Sadness is the weather. When you realize this, something shifts deeply within you. You stop believing that emotions have power over you. You stop confusing temporary conditions for permanent identity. Sadness becomes a visitor, not a master. Pain becomes a moment, not a life sentence. Fear becomes a ripple, not a destiny. Impermanence grounds you in truth. Nothing is final. Nothing is fixed. Nothing stays. That means your sadness is already fading, even if you don't feel it yet. The process is already happening. The movement is already in motion. Your only job is not to interfere, not to freeze the emotion with fear, not to trap it with resistance, not to magnify it with stories. Let it rise. Let it move. Let it soften. Let it go. Impermanence is not just a concept, it's liberation. It frees you from clinging, frees you from fear, frees you from the illusion that your current emotional state defines your future. The moment you remember that nothing stays, you return to your power. You stop being intimidated by emotional waves. You stop believing your thoughts when they tell you that this feeling will last forever. You stop collapsing under the weight of temporary sadness. And this understanding doesn't just help you during sadness, it transforms your entire relationship with life. You become more present, more grateful, more accepting. You enjoy joy without clinging to it. You endure sorrow without being broken by it. You move with life instead of fighting it. The deepest peace comes from realizing that everything you experience is temporary and that you are bigger, deeper, and more expansive than any emotion passing through you. Sadness is a moment. You are the witness of that moment. Sadness is a wave. You are the ocean it moves through. Once you fully grasp impermanence, you become unshakable. Life still changes, but you don't collapse. Emotions still rise, but you don't drown. Pain still appears, but you don't cling to it. You understand the truth at the core of Buddhism. Nothing stays. And because nothing stays, you are always free. Sadness is not a punishment. It's not a sign that you're weak, broken, or behind in life. It's simply a moment, a visitor, a passing change in your inner weather. The suffering comes from fighting it, fearing it, and believing it means something permanent about you. But now you've seen the truth. You are not your sadness. You are the awareness behind it. You are the space it moves through. You are the one watching the rise and fall, not the emotion itself. When you allow sadness instead of resisting it, when you breathe into it instead of tightening around it, when you investigate it instead of drowning in stories, and when you remember that nothing stays, the emotion loses its grip. It becomes lighter, softer, more honest. This isn't about eliminating sadness. That has never been the goal. The goal is to stop letting sadness control your life. Every time sadness returns, meet it with clarity, not fear. Meet it with understanding, not judgment. Meet it with awareness, not resistance. If you do, the emotion becomes something you can walk through instead of something you collapse under. This is the heart of Buddhist practice, seeing reality clearly. And once you see sadness clearly, it can no longer overwhelm you. You are not trapped. You are not helpless. You are simply human experiencing a moment that will pass, just like every moment before it. Return to your breath. Return to awareness. Return to impermanence. And let the wave move through you, not define you.